computer. Okay. So we are on the second week of Ecclesiastes, and a quick overview. Ecclesiastes was written by King Solomon. He also wrote 18 Psalms, Proverbs, and the Song of Songs. He was born over 3,000 years ago. He was the son of King David. He became king at the age of 19, served for 40 years, and died at 59. He had wisdom, wealth, and power. And when he wrote this book, which was later in his life, we believe after the other things he wrote, he had lost his way. This is not to say that someone who is foolish, poor, and powerless can't lose their way, because they can. But it helps us to remember that Jesus said it's harder for a rich man to enter the gates of heaven than a camel to go through the eye of a needle. And why is that? Because maybe if you're wise, rich, and powerful, you begin to think you don't need God. And there are some people that believe that because, I guess, Solomon was wise, rich, and powerful, that he didn't write this book. In fact, the Muslims, what's their...
Well, and that's one of the things. One of the questions that comes up is, did Solomon really write it? It's hard to believe that someone who has everything could get to this shape. And also, he's one of these people, one of the patriarchs. And there are people who don't like to believe that a follower of God can lose his or her way. But the Muslims, at least a lot of Muslims, actually say that it wasn't Solomon who did all these things. It was an imposter, like maybe even a demon sort of thing. So they don't like to admit that one of the patriarchs fell into this. And he did do a lot of these things, like turning to wine. You know, I mean, they have a very negative view of alcohol. So it couldn't have been Solomon. It must have been an imposter. And that's what we do. And that's what's been done over the years. As I told you, I am, after a lot of looking into it, I'm convinced it was Solomon that wrote this. So
this book should serve as a wake-up call for us that we too can lose our way. And the feelings in this book, this idea of hovel, which I'll let you refresh everybody's memory on, this feeling of almost, it seems depressing, has been expressed by many. And you will see that a lot of songwriters have gone back to, it appears that have gone back to the book of Ecclesiastes and written songs using some of the lyrics or some of the words of Ecclesiastes, and we'll show some of those today. And a final note, you look at Solomon and he states, he's very wise and he states a lot of truths in this book, but then he makes conclusions, and his conclusions, some or most of them, are a result of him losing his way. Do you want to look at hovel real quick, because it's translated differently in different people's Bibles that they have?
So Mary was on a trip this week. She spent basically the whole week in Arizona, and she had an entire week to write an intro. Yeah. So last week, that word that gets translated as futility, vanity, and all that, it has to do with something that's a vapor, something you reach for and it just escapes your hands. And it's just good to keep in mind, because he's going to keep saying it. Vanity, all is vanity, or all is futility. That's where he's at. I had, not to compare myself to Solomon, but when I was like early college age, I think I was prematurely weary. I had seen a lot of this same stuff. So I was thinking a lot of the same things. And when I found it, I said, well, great. The wisest man ever just sort of confirms what I'm seeing, that all of this, I mean, this is a terrible place. And it took time to understand and to A, find a way out, but B, understand this is not a good place to be, even for Solomon.
So we left last time at Ecclesiastes chapter 2, verse 12. Then I turned to consider wisdom and madness and folly. For what more can the king's successor do than what has already been accomplished? And I saw that wisdom exceeds folly, just as light exceeds darkness. The wise man has eyes in his head, but the fool walks in darkness. Yet I also came to realize that one fate overcomes them both. So I said to myself, the fate of the fool will befall me. What then have I gained by being wise? And I said to myself that this too is futile. For there is no lasting remembrance of the wise, just as with the fool, seeing that both will be forgotten in the days to come. Alas, the wise man will die just like the fool. So I hated life, because the work that is done under the sun was grievous to me, for everything is futile and a pursuit of the wind, sorry.
And there's a whole lot to be said in between here, but look at that one line. He says, I hated life. If anybody is still doubtful that what we're saying is true of what was going on, Solomon reaches a point. He says, I hated life because, you work, you build, you do all this stuff, and then you just have to leave it at the end. You just have to leave it behind. And you're going to hear these recurring themes. That's one of the reasons I don't base the things that we're saying on one comment. You hear him say it over and over again, that I just, everything is wearisome. I hate life. And this idea, all of this stuff that he built, he's going to have to leave behind. And it's just not fair. And the same fate, he says, befalls everybody, the wise man and the fool. And we both wind up in the same place. We die. And if you saw that the movie Field of Dreams, where the Kevin Costner's out there near the end, and he says, look, I did all this stuff and I never once said what's in it for me. And the guy asked him, well, what are you saying, Ray? Well, I'm saying what's in it for me. I did all this stuff for you and you're not repaying me, giving me more than someone else. And that's one of those traps that we fall into. I have seen people who have been very devout in their faith, and they begin coming to a point in life where some condition or begins to befall them, their health begins to fail, and they get angry because they say, look, I did all this for you. What's in it for me? That's where Solomon is. And it's a sort of a trap that we fall into. But again, as I said, you look at him, say, I hated life. You know that this guy is pretty far down a dark road.
I hated all for which I had toiled under the sun, because I must leave it to the man who comes after me. And who knows whether that man will be wise or foolish? Yet he will take over all the labor at which I have worked skillfully under the sun. This too is futile. You laugh because
he didn't do that work. He had all those people doing that work. Solomon didn't labor under the sun, but it's still, you see that thing. It's mine.
When I was listening to a sermon while taking planes yesterday, and it was talking about Solomon building his temple. And as we talked about last week, it took 3.5 years to build this temple and then 7 years to build his palace, or maybe it was 7 to 14 or something. But he had 183,000 people work on the palace and on, so he was not toiling under the sun. I'm not sure he was even directing the toil under the sun. But so my heart began to despair over all the labor that I had done under the sun. When there is a man who has labored with wisdom, knowledge, and skill, and he must give his portion to a man who has not worked for it, this too is futile and a great evil. For what does a man get for all the toil and striving with which he labors under the sun? Indeed, all his days are filled with grief, and his task is sorrowful. Even at night, his mind does not rest. This too is futile. Nothing is better for a man than to eat and drink and enjoy his work. I have also seen that this is from the hand of God. For apart from him, who can eat and who can find enjoyment? To the man who is pleasing in his sight, he gives wisdom and knowledge and joy. But to the sinner, he assigns the task of gathering and accumulating that which he will hand over to one who pleases God. This too is futile and pursuit of the wind.
So you see that he knows some things intellectually. And we're telling you this, I'm telling you this because I've gone down this road. I mean, I've been right here, and you know things, but you can't really live them that way. You can't bring yourself to make it part of you. And so he says, there's nothing better than to eat and drink and enjoy your labor. He understands that there are good things in this world. And God, and he says, I see that even that comes from God himself. That's a gift. This work that we do with our hands, this labor, is a gift, and enjoy it. And he knows that. And then he turns right around and says, yeah, but you do all this work and you got to hand it over to somebody else who's not maybe as wise or as skillful as you. And he's telling you about himself. And this is the part that I love. He says that, I know that I've actually got to read it, but he says that to the man who is pleasing in his sight, he gives wisdom and knowledge and joy. We need to do a couple of weeks on just joy versus happiness. But he gives wisdom, and to the man who pleases him, he gives wisdom and knowledge and joy. But to the sinner, he assigns the task of gathering and accumulating that which he will hand over to one who pleases God. Now, this is the thing, and this is important to learn, because when you find yourself beginning to get in these sorts of places, to remember these lessons. He says to the one who pleases God, he gives the task of gathering and accumulating, but to the one who doesn't please God, he gathers and has to hand it over to someone. And that's also him. He doesn't even see that he's talking about himself. He's upset that he's done all this stuff and he's going to have to hand it over to someone else. And then he turns right around and says to the sinner who doesn't please God, he gets to gather stuff and then hand it over to someone else. It's him. And he's just miserable. But the irony of a lot of this, and we're going to see that, where he talks about things as if it's someone else, and he doesn't even see it's really, really him. So,
well, and he talks with some knowledge, and then he turns around with a bizarre conclusion that we'll see. But I think this is a good time if you want to show. A lot of musical artists have used this concept or have struggled with this, and you can hear some of the same.
Yeah, I'm going to play some really short clips, but and let's go down. Let's start 3 because
Okay.
It'll make a lot more sense.
Okay, so
Before we
yeah.
go to 3,
yeah. Oh, what happened?
aren't the last 2 paragraphs telling us who he's really writing to? Obviously, he knows everything, so he's not writing to himself. He's not writing to the peons. So I think he's writing to the leaders.
He could be. I mean, he could be writing to the leaders. But
I have done it all. I've seen it all. And guys, you got to be careful.
we aren't told. He doesn't come right out and say, this is who I'm writing to. So we have to speculate. If we're gonna consider it all, we have to speculate. And you said he's not writing to himself. There's a little, consider the possibility that he's writing to God. He is actually venting his anger. He's writing, but he is voicing all of his disappointments and frustrations. I don't know, Gene. It's possible he's writing to the leaders. It could be to the leaders.
Consider God. And so he's saying, I am a sinner. I am not following what I should be following. And God is, quote, punishing me, unquote.
Well,
because I'm miserable.
So let's take a little side trip here. What's important about this, and I don't want to give anyone the impression that what this is about is let's jump on Solomon and say, look at all these wrong things he did. Because as people go, he seems to have been he's a pretty good guy. But it's about, how do you get out of this? How do you escape looking around you and seeing leaders who oppress other people? How do you look around and see all this stuff and reach sort of this point and then get away from it? It's easy right now, if you look at the headlines, you look at the news, to say things are going, I mean, they're going pretty badly wrong. How do you not get depressed? There is another line from Deuteronomy that says, and this is one of the things that I'm cheating a little bit, we'll get back to it, but it was one of the things that helped me more than anything else. Delight in the Lord, and he will give you the desires of your heart. And I saw that first of all, delighting in the Lord is an important part of not getting here or getting away from it, but give you the desires of your heart. I saw people using that to the sort of name it and claim it religion, the Joel Osteens. You know, he'll just give you whatever you want. If you believe hard enough, if you do the right thing, he'll just give you whatever you want. And it wasn't until, because I have a thing about words, that word give is natan. It's a Hebrew word, natan, that usually gets translated as put or place. And I am convinced that what that was saying is he actually gives you, places in you, the desires of your heart. And we see that Solomon, the desires of his heart led him to have 700 wives and 300 concubines. Possibly his desires are misplaced. And what he, I believe, ceased to do is delight in the Lord. And that's an important part of this, delight in the Lord, and he'll place the desires in your heart. And I'm going to remind you of that here in a little bit in this book. But the point of this, to study and say, oh, look, Solomon lost his way. What's the matter? Oh, Solomon lost his way. How does that benefit us unless we look at this and say, what do we do when we lose our way? How do we get back from there? And so you know, Gene, some of the stuff that you ask, maybe he is saying to God, look, I've sinned, I've done wrong. I don't know, but what we do see is that Solomon is depressed. He's in a dark place. And what we need to try and begin looking at in this is, how do we avoid it? How do we get our way back when we stray down some of those same paths?
I almost think of this like a journal, like because he goes, if you ever journaled and you go back and read your journal, you're all over the place. I mean, I feel like that's what Solomon does. He goes, and so as we enter chapter 3, he seems like he's in a different place that day.
I did not anticipate the theme, the question of who is he writing to. But what I can tell you is 3,000 years later, he was writing to me. When I picked this up, when I was going through this, he was absolutely speaking to me, because as I said, I guess I was prematurely weary at things that I saw going on in the world. So, you know, lucky me. Whether he intended it or not, it was absolutely directed at where I was.
But isn't that the bottom line on the Bible?
Yes, I think so.
It is for me.
Yes.
In my guidance, beware of this, and this is good. Da, 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 da. That's the purpose of this whole book.
Oh, I think so. Yes.
So I don't know why we're surprised.
But because, as I said to someone last week, sometimes I have to learn the same lesson over and over and over again.
Ecclesiastes 3. Now, this is the part of Ecclesiastes that everybody's heard. So listen to it differently this time, thinking to yourself what we just heard about Solomon. To everything there is a season and a time for every purpose under heaven, a time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to uproot, a time to kill and a time to heal, a time to break down and a time to build, a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to mourn and a time to dance, a time to cast away stones and a time to gather stones together, a time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing, a time to search and a time to count as lost, a time to keep and a time to discard, a time to tear down and a time to mend, a time to be silent and a time to speak, a time to love and a time to hate, a time for war and a time for peace.
And so we said we were going to play a couple of things. I'll do this real quick. I think pretty much everybody remembers this from the 60s. Let's see if I can make it work.
You guys remember the 60s, right?
And are you guys hearing it?
Can't see you.
Well, yeah, the sharing, they changed the sharing again, but it was that song that said, to everything there's a season, turn, turn, turn. They actually, and that was Pete Seeger, the Byrds made it, but Pete Seeger wrote the melody. The lyrics come directly from Solomon. I mean, this was a big song in the 60s, but it has remained a big song. And all he did was take the lines from Ecclesiastes, to everything there's a season and a time for every purpose or every activity under heaven. This depression Solomon is going through, if you've ever thought about or wondered why so many artists, musicians, but also artists wind up dying young, they left too soon. A lot of them look at things in this world, they see things that maybe we don't pay as much attention to. They spend their time looking at that side of things, and a lot of them get in the same shape. They get depressed. Jackson Browne wrote a song, "Doctor, my eyes have seen the years and the slow parade of fears without crying." And he's basically, it's a guy who's gone to the doctor and said, was I unwise to leave them open for so long? He's hurting because of the things he sees and the things he has seen. And he's questioning now, maybe I just shouldn't have looked so hard. Maybe I should have just closed my eyes a little sooner. Solomon's not unique. Lots of people wind up, and those songs become popular because other people look and see the injustice, the things that plague us. So it's not a sort of a curiosity of some guy from 3,000 years ago. And I don't have the music playing. I'll tell you, there's one other one. Those of you who know a band called Kansas, the lead singer, Kerry Livgren, is a devout Christian, but they wrote a song called "Dust in the Wind." And you read it and you think, oh my gosh, that could be Solomon. He's saying the same thing. Nothing lasts forever but the earth and sky. And I assumed he must have read it in Ecclesiastes and put it in his song, but he wasn't a believer when he wrote that. It's just that these same things occur to a whole lot of people.
We would listen to an interview of him because we thought he must have read Ecclesiastes and wrote the song, and he was talking about it was after he was searching for something more in life, and he wrote the song, like you said, before he became a believer, but that was part of the search. So it was interesting. But this section of Ecclesiastes, as I said, where do you hear it? You hear it at funerals. And it's, the minister wants to remind us that it was time for our loved one to die. That was that time, and it's a time for us to mourn. And there will come another time for us to be joyful. And all of those are truisms. And who wrote that? Solomon wrote all these truisms. But if we keep reading in chapter 3, you think he just wrote these truisms, and then he seems like he doesn't really
there's something else buried in this section. To everything there's a season, and we'll bring it out. Let's go on ahead.
Okay. What does the worker gain from his toil? I have seen the burden that God has laid upon the sons of men to occupy them. He has made everything beautiful in its time. He has also set eternity in the hearts of men, yet they cannot fathom the work that God has done from beginning to end.
So immediately, what does the worker gain from his toil? I don't know how many of you have been in really big corporations but there are times you hear people say, I feel like a small cog in a great big wheel. I go to work, I did my thing today, and I didn't really accomplish anything. And here he is, here's Solomon. What does the worker gain? What does he really get out of all of his toil? I mean, if you've ever stocked shelves in a grocery store, I have. You get them perfect, you get them fronted, everything looks really good. And then those darn customers come along and ruin everything. And you're right back where you were just a few hours later. And it's this never ending. And I like to joke with
Or washing
people
dishes.
when they're stocking in the grocery store. I always tell them, if it wasn't for all those customers, this would be a great job. And they laugh because they know what I'm talking about. What do you get out of all of this work? And then he says,
He has made everything beautiful in its time.
here's Solomon in this place. And I keep telling you, there are things he knows intellectually. He's made everything beautiful in its time. In the middle of all of this, he still understands. And this, I hope you will listen to the whole thing before you jump to conclusions. Things like these hurricanes. God made a place here. If I was an engineer, I would love to think I would have made it like this. There's a system, there are laws, there are rules, and it works, and it's beautiful. It's not so beautiful when you're the one on the receiving end. I get that. But a lot of times people think, I want God to suspend the rules for me. This isn't going well, and I want you to suspend the rules. If we lived in a world that was like a Looney Tunes cartoon, where the roadrunner runs off the edge and just keeps running, and the coyote falls to, makes a big pile of smoke at the bottom, things fell up sometimes to keep you from skinning your knee when you fall down. Our little brains could not contain it. The chaos that we would live in would drive us mad. We depend on knowing that there's a system, that things work. And if you jump off the cliff, you're going to splat at the bottom. Don't do that. Don't, reach your hand out and say, to God, catch me, because I'm about to do this. You know the rules. And the more time you spend, and this is one of the other things that I'll tell you when it came to getting out of sort of this state, is I realized that the more time I spend saying thank you, the less time I need to spend saying please. And I spent a lot of time in prayer saying please on stuff. And what I was asking for was that he suspend the rules of this beautiful system. And it is. There are times we look at it and we say, I don't like this, this affects me. But the place works. It's beautiful. And what Solomon says is he made all things beautiful in their time. Now, ask me if I'm living in Central Florida, that's not the time to tell someone, hey, you need to look around and say this, things are beautiful here. We get that. But looking at it when you're not in the middle of that is helpful in dealing with those times where the system is unpleasant for you. So he's got this, these thoughts in here. He's made everything beautiful in its time.
And then this next sentence is what you were referring to earlier in Deuteronomy. He has also set eternity in the hearts of men, yet they cannot fathom the work that God has done from the beginning to end. Sorry.
So when it says he's set eternity in the hearts of men, that is the same word. When I told you before, delight in the Lord, and he will put the desires in your heart. He has put the idea of eternity into the hearts of men. He has set. It is the same word. It's the same concept. He will give you the desires of your heart. He gave you this idea of eternity in our hearts. And he says, and yet man can't conceive of everything that God has done, all of his works from beginning to end. There are some translations that say that he's set this idea of eternity in our hearts so that we can't understand, as if God is like trying to trick us or trap us or play a joke on us. And this translation that it says he's put this idea of eternity, in our hearts, and yet we can't understand everything he's done from beginning to end. We have to have faith. We just have to accept and trust in some portion of this.
And this is the part with, for me, this idea of eternity or heaven, as you go through your Christian walk, as you grow in your faith, no, I don't think I'm going to sit in heaven, play a harp the whole time. Okay. I'm over that part. But this idea of we don't understand what this eternity business means. If I'm really honest, I think to myself, okay, I'm not going to be playing a harp, but what are we going to be doing? That crosses my mind. Maybe I'm the only one, but what am I going to be doing? And eternity sounds like a very long time, you guys. And, and you think of that and you talk to people and you say, I'm going through a rough time, or someone who's terminally ill and they're looking forward to heaven. But, if we're really honest with ourselves, this idea of eternity and what it's going to be like, we don't know.
Did not see that coming.
Sorry, I was sat in the airport too long yesterday.
Well, it's true. And you hear that conversation a lot. And for today, let's just say that trust factors in. Nobody knows, but I'm pretty sure that this is good. And I'll trust the details. Yes, Jim.
To me, I'm hearing a few good men. I want the truth. You can't handle the truth.
You can't handle the truth.
You're right.
That was the bad guy saying those words. You can't handle the truth. This guy saying, I've been through it. I purposely went and got drunk. I purposely went and got 1,000 women. It's not leading anywhere. It's a vanity of vanity. And now he's coming right here and he's saying, God.
So let's take one more quick skip sideways. We see in the New Testament often that what Jesus says is, several times we see referred to life more abundant.
Right.
So I came here to give you life more abundant. And that's what Solomon is missing is life more abundant. He's focused on things.
And life more abundant is about life here.
That's true.
Right.
But isn't this the precursor? He's setting up the circumstances of the Messiah coming, was going to kick up this. If I don't see it, if I do it, and I don't understand it, it leads nowhere. I need to know everything, which means I'm God. And then he puts a little bit and he said, if you're pleasing to God, he'll give you knowledge and wisdom and joy.
Well, and it may be, he may be doing that. I think at this point, he's pretty much fed up with what he sees, but let's go to the next one and some of it will tie together, I hope.
I know that there's nothing better for them than to rejoice and do good while they live. And also that every man should eat and drink and find satisfaction in all his labor. This is the gift of God. I know that everything God does endures forever. Nothing can be added or taken away from it. God does it so that they should fear him. What exists has already been, and what will be has already been. For God will call to account what has passed.
It's an interesting thing because he says I know that what has been, let me be sure I get it right. I know that everything what exists has already been, and what will be has already been. What used to be has already been, but also what's going to be has already been. And there is this concept here that time is something that we place importance on that maybe doesn't affect God the same way. And maybe that's why I waited. That's a little bit of an answer when we start wondering, what is eternity going to be like? That seems like a long time. If you're reckoning time, then all of this is a little scary. If you can get used to the idea that time may not be quite so, important, or maybe doesn't even exist, it's not so scary. So there's a matter of trust here. But what I don't know if I love it, but what I'm intrigued with is Solomon these things that don't add up. He says, I know there's nothing better for them than to eat and drink and enjoy your work, which once again, he's mostly just eating and drinking. He's not working a whole lot. But there's nothing better for them than to just
To rejoice.
eat, drink, and be merry, to rejoice. But he says, this is the gift of God. I mean, that's an understanding that this, work that we do and finding satisfaction in it. And Dee, I can't help but think about you and what you've meant to us. No, you enjoy the labor that you do. You take satisfaction in doing it well. And it is satisfying. And he says, this is a gift from God. He knows things intellectually, and yet he's the king of all of this, and he's just not taking a lot of satisfaction in it.
He knows it one minute and forgets it the next. Should I go on?
Yeah.
Furthermore, I saw under the sun that in the place of judgment, there is wickedness, and in the place of righteousness, there is wickedness. I said in my heart, God will judge the righteous and the wicked, since there is a time for every activity and every deed.
You got to stop there.
Okay.
So I told you we would get back to something a while ago. That first section where he says in this right here in 3, to everything there's a season and a time for every purpose under heaven, or every activity under heaven. There's a time and a place appointed for everything. And we nod our heads and we go, yeah, okay. But I want you to look. There's a word here in that section that we just read. And I'm just lost. I apologize. Can you?
God will judge the righteous and the wicked, since there is a time
there
for
we go.
every
Yeah.
activity and every deed.
It's verse 17, if you're following along. There's a word in there that you got to pay attention to. It is since. He says, since there's a time and a place for everything. He's referring back to that beautiful bit of poetry that there's a time and a place for everything. He established that there's a time and a place for everything in God's time. And then he says, since there's a time and a place for everything,
God will judge the righteous and the wicked.
If you're ever reading, or if you hear a sermon or whatever in the Bible, and it starts with a passage that the first word is therefore, go back and read what came before. They've taken it out of context. You can't have a therefore without knowing what came before that caused it.
Same with since.
And that's how you get things out of context. Well, since is one of those words. Since this, I know this. And that's what he's done here. He says that he looks in the place of righteousness, the place of judgment. And that has to do with the leaders, but he sees all this injustice. He sees all of this wickedness going on even. And he says, I know that God will eventually judge this, because since there is a time and a place for everything, right now, there's a time and a place for these people to act wickedly. There's a time and a place for them to oppress the people that they're in charge of. But since there's a time and a place for everything, I know there's also going to be a time for them to be called into account. And he actually says it. We just sort of blow over it. We sort of miss it. Let me read it again. I said to myself, as for the sons of, furthermore, I saw under the sun that in the place of judgment, there is wickedness. And in the place of righteousness, there is wickedness. And if you follow politics, I know it's one of my pet peeves, but you don't have to look very hard to see that people get in positions of power. What do they say? Absolute power corrupts absolutely. If you look very hard, you will see this. But then he says, and I said in my heart, God will judge the righteous and the wicked, since there is a time for every activity and every deed. He starts out telling you there's a time for every activity, a time and a place, set aside for it. But there's also going to be a time where this stuff, these wicked acts, are going to be judged. And you don't realize that this first part is beautiful, but then he's come over and he says, since I've established a time and a place for everything, this stuff is going to be judged.
I said to myself, as for the sons of men, God tests them so that they may see for themselves that they are but beasts. For the fates of both men and beasts are the same. As one dies, so dies the other. They will have the same breath. Man has no advantage over the animals, since everything is futile. All go to one place. All come from dust and all return to dust. Who knows if the spirit of man rises upward and the spirit of animal descends into the earth? I have seen that there is nothing better for a man than to enjoy his work, because that is his lot. For who can bring him to see what will come after him? This doesn't sound too cheery.
Well, it's not. And he says God tests men so that they will see that they're nothing more than beasts. Because after all, we die, beasts die, we're all the same. And you know, this is someone who is now sort of losing that trust in God, losing the idea that there is anything beyond this. And all he's concerned about is the dust that we're made of. When we finally stop breathing, just becomes dust again. He's only thinking about here and now and today, and he can't get past that. And they all go, who can say if the spirit of man goes up and the spirit of the beasts go down into the ground? Basically, we all die.
And yet this is the same chapter that says he being God has also set eternity in the hearts of men.
I think that's known as being conflicted. There's a guy from, well, he was from Jamaica, Bob Marley, reggae singer. And he's got a song that says, you know, we all know and understand the mighty God is a living man. And if you knew what life is worth, you would look for yours on earth. And now you see the light, you got to stand up for your rights. But that concept that all that matters is here and now. If you knew what life is worth, you'd look for you need to get yours now while the getting is good. And what we have to see is it's not very satisfying. Ultimately, it's not a very satisfying look at things.
So did Solomon have an understanding of the word chesed?
Solomon, as you see, what I'm trying to bring out is that Solomon had an understanding
Of a lot
of things, but he also has reached a point where he's saying, is this all there is? Is it all right? I'm going to tell you another little story. When I was about, I don't know, 7, I don't know what got into my dad. Maybe he woke up just really into this idea of being a parent. But he wakes me up at 6 o'clock in the morning or something, and we go have donuts and hot chocolate, right? This is very cool. I didn't see it coming. And he takes me from there to a parade. We go downtown. He puts me on his shoulders. We watch a parade go. And I thought, this is amazing. It was a great morning. And then we go from there to a place called FedMart, which was like prehistoric Walmart. And he bought me a watch, a real watch with a Twist-O-Flex band, you know, a grown-up watch. And we had to take links out to fit my wrist because I'm little, but he buys me a real watch. And I thought, this is just incredible. And we go from there. We may have stopped by the house for a bit, but we go from there. We went to a movie. There was a Disney movie at the theater, and we watched.
This was not your dad's
This
normal.
is not my dad's MO. Like I said, I don't know what got into my dad. But from there, we go to a Dairy Queen. And we sit, and he orders a hot fudge sundae for both of us. And I sit down, and before I've taken the first bite of the hot fudge sundae, I said, where are we going next?
Solomon.
And I told you I was an odd child. I don't know what to tell you, but I saw things. But what I saw in my dad's face was disappointment, hurt, more than a little bit of anger, because he has constructed this perfect day Yes. And what I'm saying is, what's next? What now? I've gotten so used to it already. I'm thinking, what is the next big firework that's going to happen in this day that's going to come into my life? Now, that's something of the human condition. We do that. So back to what you said, Gene, Solomon knows a lot of stuff, but Solomon has reached a point where he's saying, is this all there is? And not only that, but even all of this, I'm going to have to give it up. I'm going to die. I'm going to go back to dust. And he's resents it. It's not enough, God. So who's he writing to? The idea that he's sort of making a gripe session, I want God to hear this. I'm sure he's spoken to God about these things. I'm sure there's been, prayer going on, but this is what's going on. And this is another one of those places. How do we avoid getting where he is, or how do we get away from it? Delight in the Lord, and he'll give you the desires of your heart. Solomon has gone out now. What he desires is more, more, more. Maybe that's rule number one. More is never very satisfying.
I can't help think that God must think sometimes like your dad did. Be disappointed. He's given us all these things and we say, hey, God, what's next?
The thought has crossed my mind a few hundred times over my life. Yes.
Chapter 4. Again, I looked and I considered all the oppression taking place under the sun. I saw the tears of the oppressed, and they had no comforter. The power lay in the hands of their oppressors, and there was no comforter. So I admired the dead who had already died above the living who are still alive. But better than both is he who has not yet existed, who has not seen the evil that is done under the sun. I saw that all labor and success spring from a man's envy of his neighbor. This too is futile and a pursuit of the wind. The fool holds his hands and consumes his own flesh. Better one handful with tranquility than two handfuls with toil and pursuit of the wind.
The last part probably sums up the rest. Better one handful with tranquility than two handsful with toil and pursuit of the wind. When we were studying this, I told Mary, when we were in Israel, the merchants there spend their entire life trying to cheat the customers and being outsiders, and this is not our normal monetary system. It was constant. If they could get you for 2 cents because you didn't convert well, they'd get to you for 2 cents. Buying bagala, buying these, if they could, a nickel, and they're miserable all the time because they're just striving. And I laughed. There was one day when I was actually buying bagala, and the guy he cheated me out of about a nickel. And I could have argued with him, but I walked away thinking to myself, by the time you reach the end of your life, you're going to be hundreds of dollars ahead living this way, at least tens of dollars ahead. It's just, to me, I thought it would not be worth all of the anguish that they go through. And trying to be sure that somebody doesn't cheat them. By the way, they have a term called don't be a friar. Don't be a friar. If someone cheats you, it's your fault. Don't be a fool. Don't be a chump. If someone cheats you, so they spend, it's part of the culture, but they're trying to get to somebody else for an extra nickel, and someone's always trying to get them for an extra nickel. And what Solomon is saying, it's better to have one handful of something with tranquility than two hands full with anguish and strife in pursuit of the wind.
The other concept here is envy.
Envy.
Greatest motivator in the world.
It is one of them. When we look at what someone else has and think, what was that? Was it Chris Rock that we went to, the comedian, that says when a guy has a friend who has his girlfriend he thinks is wonderful, he thinks, I want a girl just like her. When that happens with two women and she's got a boyfriend that's really wonderful, the other woman thinks, I want him. and And it is this idea, what Solomon is saying is looking at envy and what it does to us, that we want what someone else has, and it makes people miserable. Life more abundant, Gene, life more abundant. That envy is not life more abundant.
Again, I saw futility under the sun. There's a man all alone, without even a son or a brother. And though there is no end to his labor, his eyes are still not content with his wealth. For whom do I toil and bereave my soul of enjoyment? This too is futile, a miserable task. Two are better than one because they have a good return for their labor. For if one falls down, his companion can lift him up. But pity the one who falls without another to help him up. Again, if two lie down together, they will keep warm. But how can one keep warm alone? And though one may be overpowered, two can resist. Moreover, a cord of 3 strands is not quickly broken.
So if we're going with the idea that Solomon is writing about himself, at least at some level, these are things he knows. Why is he talking about, somebody who toils alone? He doesn't have anybody to share it with. Two are better than one. I suspect that there's a reason he's accumulated 700 wives and 300 concubines. There's a term we use called feeling alone in a crowd. Most of us have experienced it. I certainly have. And I think that Solomon, for all of his 700 wives and 300 concubines,
Felt alone.
probably feels like, they only want me for my money. That's a theme we've heard. And here's Solomon. He's saying, two are better than one. If one falls down, the other. Now he says that if two lie down, they can keep each other warm. I suspect that he at least was not getting cold at night. But it is, you see in him, you see there's something just unfulfilled. He keeps looking to stuff. He keeps looking to his own wisdom. He keeps looking to this life, and it's not satisfying.
Better is a poor but wise youth than an old but foolish king who no longer knows how to take a warning. For the youth has come from the prison to the kingship, though he was born poor in his own kingdom. I saw that all who lived and walked under the sun followed the second one, the youth who succeeded the king. There is no limit to all the people who were before them, yet the successor will not be celebrated by those who come even later. This too is futile and a pursuit of the wind.
So we're going to hit the end of a chapter. I know that makes you happy when we
does.
end the day on a chapter break. There were no chapter breaks when we originally wrote these things. But he talks about seeing this a young king than an old and foolish king. I'm convinced, I believe this is a reference to his father. Solomon's father was David. David was born relatively poor. He was the youngest of a bunch of brothers, and he rose from that lowly state to become king. And he talks about a king who could no longer take instruction or correction. That's Saul. And this is an exact, representation of David and Saul, and this old but foolish king who can no longer take correction. And this young man rises from being poor, and he was chased. I don't know, he was in prison, but he was certainly treated like a criminal. And Solomon mentions that all the people, there's no end to the people that followed the young man, the young king. There was a time in David's youth where they would go out to war and they would come in, and all the young ladies, they all had their eye on David, and they would holler out or sing this thing that says, David or Saul has slain his thousands, but David has slain his 10,000s. So Saul gets jealous. Saul envies the attention that David is getting. This young virile man, people are following him, and they're not following this old foolish king. But then you notice, if you're following there in verse, what is that?
16.
16.
Yet Yet the successor will not be celebrated by those who come even later. This too is futile and a pursuit of the wind. So even David.
He's back to this idea that okay, sure, everybody loved him, when he's young and famous and everything else, but it all comes to the same thing. Eventually, you get old, you die, and nobody remembers. Nobody's going to remember, and they don't remember these people. And in his way, Solomon has sort of overshadowed his father, not sort of. Now, we know that we remember David, but you see what Solomon is getting at. You see what he's saying. Nobody remembers any people before Saul, and in a few generations, they're not going to remember me. These are the things that torment us. Hopefully, we're going to talk more about ways to avoid this or to come back from it. But remember, delight in the Lord, and he will place the desires in your heart. Solomon wants a bunch of things that frankly he can't have. He's not going to be immortal. He's sooner or later, you can't take it with you. Sooner or later, he has to pass on all of this stuff he's created. And as of this point in time, it is just making him miserable. Instead of delighting in the Lord, he's obsessed with his stuff.
Okay.
We're on time and at the end of a chapter. How can you do better than that? God, this feeling of being thankful comes from recognizing your hand, of recognizing all the times that you've been with us, that you've had your hand on us, that even when we don't recognize it, we know it to be true. We don't understand this idea of eternity. We don't understand what comes after. And yet, when we trust, we find that our eyes are opened and we realize that there is a reason to trust you, that there is a world that is beautiful and wonderful and works. And we have to believe, we have to understand that your plan for us not ending here means that it's going to be at least that good. And so the thing we ask for today, the thing I ask for, is eyes to see that, and a heart that trusts, a heart that looks to you, that delights in you, that learns to trust in the goodness that you have for us. And I'm saying this knowing that there are people in the aftermath of this terrible storm that certainly will have a hard time understanding that today, for weeks and months to come, years to come. Send us where you need us to go. If it's not there, it's somewhere else. We know that. You have work for us to do that we can delight in. Send us and open our hearts to that, to know that it's our place to bring your hand at times into other people in this world. It's the work we've been given that's important. Amen.
You guys can unmute yourselves. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much.
It's great.
Oh, they fell off.
A great
Oh, no, there they are. Bob and Julie. I know, Bob, you said you're not gonna speak ill of the coach. And I said I would do it for you. I'm sorry. I'm sorry, but no. And because he uses Ben as a decoy so often. During the game, Julie texted Mary and said Ben was open several times. Julie, Ben was open every time just about that they didn't use him as a blocker or a decoy. He rolls out and they use him to draw defenders. That, they should really probably throw his way a little more. Sorry, Bob, but I'm going to criticize.
We've only been saying that.
I agree.
We've only been saying that for the last 4 seasons.
Oh, I can't hear. I'll call later.
We agree.
You guys have a good week and
Thank you.
Sherry, enjoy the wonderful weather.
Thanks.
You guys
Okay.
good.
Bye,
Okay.
everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Have a great week.
Leave.
Okay.